And welcome back. Now, in 2020, the United Nations Refugee Agency, or the UNHCR, and its partners registered a record of more than 2,000 civilians killed in 3 eastern provinces of the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the DRC. Now, the deaths were recorded in Ituri, North Kivu and South Kivu, and attacks by armed groups are carried out on the suspicion of collaboration with other rebels or the Congolese security forces. And some of these locations are under threat from multiple armed groupings at any given time. And civilians find themselves trapped in the middle of all of this. So to talk a little bit more about this, we join on the line from Kinshasa by UNHCR Representative for the DRC, Liz Ahua. Liz, good morning. Thanks so much for speaking to us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So for those of us who are perhaps unaware of what's actually been happening in the Eastern DRC conflict, what exactly is going on there and who are the protagonists and what are they fighting over?
Thank you for that question. UNHCR is concerned about intensified violence in Eastern Congo because of Congolese army military operations that have been taking place since October 2019 against militia groups. There are more than 100 militia groups that are in the Eastern Congo fighting for different things. So the army, the protagonist is the Congolese army trying to flush out the armed groups that are operating in the 3 provinces. This has led to significant stress on the population that is displaced. In North Kivu alone, we have more than 1 million people that are displaced. This year, as you rightly said, over 2,000 people have been killed. There have been a lot of kidnapping of the civilian and even humanitarian community, wreaking a lot of havoc. People who are displaced are living in very, very dicey and dire conditions. So essentially, that is what is happening in the in Eastern DRC.
Liz, why particularly the Eastern DRC and the 3 provinces that we're talking about, Ituri, North Kivu and South Kivu? What is it about these 3 provinces that make them so contentious?
There's a long history of conflict in those 3 zones that goes back to so long ago. But it has been intensified in the last few years and particularly last year because of the militia groups that I mentioned before, fighting for natural resources. People want access to gold, to coltan and other minerals, and there is fighting for land. And of course, you have the traditional, if I may use that word, even though there's nothing traditional about it, but the inter-ethnic tensions between the many groupings that are in Eastern DRC. And many unresolved issues.
So if we just look, Liz, at the death toll in each of those provinces, we're talking about 1,240 people killed in Ituri, then another 590 in North Kivu and 261 in South Kivu. And these killings, there are also, of course, kidnappings that have been reported, and we understand that they are continuing, especially in North Kivu, in 2021. So we also understand that these killings and the kidnappings are directed at displaced civilians. How exactly are these civilians being attacked? What's the modus operandi?
It varies. People have reported to us, particularly those of them that are in sites. We have 22 sites into which the internally displaced people live in North Kivu specifically. They're at incursions into these sites. There are also residents that have accommodated internally displaced people because of human because they don't have access to be in all the sites. With more than 1 million people displaced in North Kivu, we don't have enough camps to keep them and enough infrastructure. So they're living with residents, and even some of the residents do get attacked. There are also thefts or in the field of their assets. So different forms of attack against the population that is displaced. We also have reports, for instance, from a local leader that some of the people that ran to his place for Saka were chased by the armed groups, and he had to negotiate with them for 3 days to keep the people there rather than being chased helter-skelter. So the attacks are going on even as we talk. 2021, we have already had more than 100,000 people who have fled, run from their homes to go and find succor elsewhere. The numbers could be more than that. It's just that in certain localities, there's even nowhere to run to. The host community is exhausted as well. They're tired. We're talking of a long-standing crisis that has escalated and intensified.
And you know, as you speak to those numbers, Liz was reading up earlier, and it would seem as though a number of about 5 million is being bandied about the number of people who've been uprooted by this insecurity and violence in the DRC over the last 2 years. And also goes on to say some of these reports, nearly 2 million people have been displaced in North Kivu province alone. And as you say, you know, it's difficult to attend to all of this. The UNHCR says there's just not enough funds, not enough aid to go around to help. So where does this leave all of these displaced people?
In clearly a very desperate situation, because indeed we do not have enough resources to attend to all the needs of the people. In 2020, UNHCR was able to provide some shelter to about 190,000 individuals. But clearly, this is far from what should be the case, because as you rightly said, across the country, even the government itself has acknowledged that there are 5.1 million people that are internally displaced. And among these people, some 2 million have sought to go back to their places of origin. So there are huge needs. There are huge needs for food. There is huge need for shelter, basic utensils such as cooking sets, because when those people flee initially, their places or their homes actually sometimes get burnt, and so they can't even go back to recover their assets. So we're talking here of a situation that I would classify as desperate for this 5.2 million people. And as we're talking, it's not just UNHCR, all the other agencies and the other NGOs with whom we work are underfunded as well. And it's part of the reason why we are not ceasing to raise the cry of alarm for the world not to forget the internally displaced people that are in the DRC.
So Liz, just getting back to those kidnappings once again, when people are kidnapped, you know, I think some scenarios readily come to mind because we've heard about these, we've read about these over the years, not just in the DRC, but in other conflict-ridden areas. Is it a similar case, though, of women being abducted for sex and boys being forced into the conflict? Is that what is happening here?
Well, the kidnappings that are reported to us are mostly for ransom. As I said, we have over 100 armed militia groups, and so with so many people to fend for, what they kidnap, the first thing that they ask for is that you pay a ransom. They're also kidnapping and forcing children to go and work in the mines because there is illegal exploitation of mines. And it's not ruled out, it cannot be ruled out that some of the adults might also be forced to align themselves to the fighting troops of the different militia groups. We have been informed that some of the women, and particularly the young girls, are more exposed to forced forced marriages, rather than sex as such. But those are the reports that we have from the community itself.
And, let's also just talk about these armed groups and some of the other activities that they have been engaging in. So the understanding is that as of November 2020, there were some illegal taxes that were imposed on people who wanted to access their farms, Liz. And we're told this happened in the villages of origin in Rutshuru territory. And this has led to these people being cut off from their only source of food and income. Do you know any more about that? We are informed that by the community, because we are in the community, we're working through community structures. We call it the community-based approach. We're working with women structures. We're working with protection structures. And we are informed that there are regular taxes that are being paid, sometimes for people to even go to the market. They want to go to the market and they have to pay a fine, they have to pay a tax to access markets. They also, when they want to go to their farms, they are fined. And sometimes if they cannot pay in cash, they then pay in kind by giving some part of their harvest to the armed groups. So those are the kinds of things that we see and we hear of. Is there any clear indication from government side as to how government plans to deal with all of this conflict? Does the new DRC president, Felix Tshisekedi, plan to resolve this conflict in any specific kind of way, especially now against the backdrop of the DRC taking up the chairmanship of the AU?
Quite naturally, the president has made efforts and is deploying efforts, both diplomatic efforts within the region. I'm sure as the media is aware of the efforts he makes to reach out to the countries in the neighboring area. He also has reached out way beyond the region to find mechanisms and that will allow for peace within the DRC. And as I said earlier, since October 2019, the government has pushed for to flush out particularly some of the foreign militia groups on the territory. I won't speak for them, but I think efforts are being made in that direction. But this is a crisis that has been going on for more than 20 years. What UNHCR thinks is that further support should be given to the police. Further support should be given to the local civilian and local administrators, so that they are strengthened to be able to work together and work for the population to succor and bring succor and rescue them from the throes of the militia groups fighting for different resources in the DRC. And quite naturally, we are also advocating for the regional powers, including the African Union, to play a role to ensure that the DRC, which is a vastly rich country, one of the richest on the planet, is able to look after its population.
And just finally, Liz, as you say, this conflict stretches beyond 2 decades now. Will it end? Can it end? And if it can, why hasn't it?
Sakina, there is always hope. We know that we cannot afford to lose hope that there will be an end to this crisis. As a representative for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we cannot but continue to advocate for an end to this crisis. we cannot be pessimistic because that would then have negative impact even on the population. So there will be an end to it, but not by DRC alone. It has to be with the cooperation of the international community. It has to be with the cooperation, continued cooperation that's been restated, because as you know very well, the UN has a mission here, MONUSCO, and so there has been engagement, and that engagement has to be sustained until such a time that DRC is able to find peace and recover security and develop itself.
Liz Ahua, thanks so much for your time this morning. And that was DRC UNHCR Representative Liz Ahua talking to us about the escalating atrocities occurring in 3 of the DRC's locations, Ituri, North Kivu and South Kivu, and the absolute devastation that goes along with it, displacement of so many people, millions of people, and the continued hardship. And one has to ask, why aren't we seeing the end of all of these conflicts? Who stands to benefit, stands to gain from all of this? But we'll leave it there for the time being. And let's just quickly recap